Hello, everybody, and welcome to this special interview that we have organized today with one of the people that were responsible for bringing us one of the great surprises of 2021, Unpacking. It looks like one of those humble indie games, I guess, but it has certainly caught the attention of a lot of people and in many ways has kind of become a big hit for the team. So thank you very much for joining us, Sanatan Mishra. I hope I pronounced that right. I'm sorry if I got that wrong again, even though we practiced before we started the interview. I'm just terrible with names, but thank you for joining us.
Yeah, no, it's great to be here and you got it perfect. So don't worry about it.
Good stuff. Very good stuff. You can imagine how hard it is for me because I do a lot of interviews with Japanese developers and stuff, and I just get names wrong all the time. I'm terrible like that. But yeah,
every culture has its own way with names.
Yes, absolutely. And I should work harder at pronouncing them right, and I just never manage to do it. But anyway, we're here to talk about your game, Unpacking. So I guess let's start with the big question first that I had burning in my brain was, I mean, did you expect it to be as successful as it has been?
Actually, I did, I think. And I reckon if you ask anybody else on the team, if I was one who had faith and had expectations like this, they'd also back that up as being a real thing. I've had a lot of faith in this game. I had a lot of faith in it from like moment zero, essentially, when I first saw it years ago as a very early prototype and before they took it to Stugun. And that faith that I had only compounded every time we would show it to the public and people would get more excited about it. And then we would do business deals or other things, and the people that we'd talk to would be like, oh, well, we're not sure of this and that, and maybe it's not right for our platform or this thing. And I'd be like thinking in the back of my head, well, they just don't understand that there's a market for this game that is so different to what you would normally understand as a market for a video game, but it also is just so massive.
So what was it that you thought would resonate most strongly with people? I mean, I've seen all kinds of interesting things about Unpacking. For example, people playing around with the replay mode in very creative ways. For example, I've seen obviously people are just enjoying the game in general. But I mean, what was it? What was this quality about the game that you think really resonated with people?
Just briefly on the replay mode, I do want to say, in terms of the very few design elements that I think I contributed to the game, the replay mode is one of them where I immediately was very sure that I would need that after the first time I played it. I was like, I need to see how this whole process went from start to finish because it was so interesting. But really, what people have responded to is just the wonderful game that is Ren and Tim's. I don't even know how to describe it. I mean, it's close to being their child as you can get without it being a child. It's something that they've been nurturing for 3.5 years, that they've obsessed over every detail of. And externally, it's kind of viewed as a meme game. And that's where I think it initially picked up excitement, as people would be like, oh, look at this. It's kind of funny. You unpack items and arrange them. And imagine doing that for several hours as a joke, like Surgeon Simulator and games like that. But what then holds their attention when they play it, and you could see this immediately the first time Tim and Ren would actually show the whole game and not just a GIF or a quick video of it, is that the attention to detail in the storytelling and all of the delicate elements of the game. It's not a meme game. It's actually the polar opposite of a meme game. And so it's got this thing where like it attracts people based on its zany, very understood concept that's universal with the unpacking objects, and then it holds you because it's the opposite of that. It's just very personal and very deep in terms of its connection.
There seems to be a habit of, I guess, Australian developers being able to do this. I mean, it was last year that Goose Game was doing a very similar thing, that people were kind of chickening out because, hey, it's a goose and he's a bit of a jerk, and then kind of getting lost within the kind of creative playfulness of the actual game itself once they got going. I mean, the goose was always a jerk, but people still had, a broader, they got something broader out of it than just the jerky moments. What do you think it is about Australian developers that have lent us that ability to kind of do this? Because, I mean, you're different team, obviously, but very similar, I guess, lightning in a bottle kind of moment.
Well, there's probably something cultural about it, to be sure. Like the Australian culture is a bit of a one where people do things in jest quite often, but then there's always a sincerity behind it. And that's a very broad statement to make. Obviously, that's not every person, and it's not extremes one way or the other. But I think, growing up, when you look at some of the best things to ever come out in literature and film and TV shows, it's often stuff that exemplifies that, right? Where it's like a bit jokey, a bit funny, but then there's a lot of sincerity and heart and depth to it. And so that's not surprising to me that translates over to games when you do it. Even here, where Ren is a migrant to Australia who didn't grow up here, but I think she's absorbed into that kind of culture too over the many years that she's been here. And that's definitely one aspect of it. The other aspect, I think, is just the way that Australian games it's kind of in its infancy in terms of people being able to actually use their own ideas. It's such a huge industry early on, but it was all built on big international mega corporations paying for and developing games here. And the local creativity was kind of stifled in that. And so people have had ideas and they've had wanted to express themselves and wanting to do these kind of wild things for decades. And only now that it's finally coming around to there being like a bit of support for the industry and more people being able to actually create things, that you're seeing the results of that.
Sure. And in terms of, I guess, surprises in terms of how people have interacted with Unpacking, for me, I think the one that stood out the most was just how few people got what a GameCube was. And I think, I've seen tweets from you that were having a laugh about that as well. That, there were all kinds of examples of people not being quite sure what to do with the GameCube or what it even was, and it was ending up on kitchen shelves and things. Were there any other kind of moments that stood out for you with regards to people interacting with this game in a way you maybe didn't anticipate?
I think the level of self-expression from people has been even higher than I could have imagined. I can't speak for too much of what other people anticipated, because once again, I'm happy to take some credit and say I supported this game and believed in it since day zero and did everything I could to make it happen. I wasn't the one calling the shots on the creative side. But talking with the rest of the team, with Tim and Ran and Jeff and everyone, it's definitely been a level of personality injected into the gameplay that goes beyond what anyone thought there would be. Some of the stuff that you were mentioning with the replays, the little animations, it's almost like what was that term where people were making videos out of a video game characters talking to each other and stuff back in the day? Machinima, it's almost like that stuff done through Unpacking, which has been just charming and wonderful to see. There was somebody who played soccer with the characters in the first level, the little dolls, and made
I
the
love
soccer
that
ball
tweet.
move around.
I absolutely love that little video. That was amazing.
It's just so charming.
It is. Absolutely. It's one of those wholesome game moments. Did Wholesome Games actually cover your game? Was that part?
Wholesome Games did do a lot of promotion for Unpacking. They've been an absolutely wonderful group that has supported the game from start to finish. I think our launch date announcement trailer went up with them. We were part of their showcase. They've just been fantastic. I know that there's quite a lot of debate around these days around wholesome games as a movement and the promotion of games as being wholesome and all that kind of stuff. But I think I can't fault people for trying to do good, even if they're not perfect. Like, I think it's important to try and do good things, and they are definitely trying to do good things.
I guess that's kind of the point, isn't it? That sure, you could say that they might be able to go about what they're doing better, but in an industry that's so obsessed with particularly violent gameplay loops and that effort at being mature and gritty and whatever, it is nice to have a group out there that is standing up for these kind of whimsical, creative little examples of expression. And I can't see how you can fault these guys for trying to do that. I think it's a good thing.
And it's a market that's ignored as well. I alluded to this earlier, but people don't know what to do with games that appeal to this space. If your game is, even our last game, Assault Android Cactus, which is a much more niche game with a smaller audience, right? But we could kind of talk to people about that, and they had an idea of who that audience was, and then they had an idea of like the value of the game based on the fact that it appealed to that audience. And that's the same for shooters and strategy like war games and other things. Even some of the more abstract stuff like visual novels and stuff, they have a very well understood market. But I have to tell you, based on some of the responses we've had to Unpacking, both business wise and also from people reaching out after they played it to tell us what they think of it, the market for this game is so broad and non-specific that people just do not know what to do with it. We had a woman reach out to us after a review went up saying that she'd read a review in the LA Times, and she was a woman of a certain age, is how she described herself, who doesn't play video games and wanted to play Unpacking and didn't understand how to play video games. So she was like, what device do I need? What website do I go to? How do I actually, get into this video game? And that's the kind of story that we keep seeing over and over. Is just there is a group of lots of people who want to play video games, but there aren't really games for them.
Yeah, or at least they're not well understood. Those kind of I guess the thing that I see a lot of is that we do have a lot of these games that are, for want of a better word, wholesome games, or they exist within niche audiences, like, for example, visual novels and stuff. If you're a fan of literature, if you're a fan of reading books, then you're probably going to find at least some visual novels that appeal to you. But the translation isn't quite there. The people who make visual novels aren't necessarily good at reaching out to the people that like literature. And I think your game would be the same, except for the fact that somehow it managed to hit that kind of moment, or searching for the word here, it managed to hit the exact audience that it needs to. So yeah, I think that it's certainly a good thing that perhaps this game, Unpacking, introduces more people, and with any luck they'll go and explore some of the other similar games that are out there that can appeal to them in the same way, I guess.
I certainly hope so. And one aspect of that has surprised me consistently is how many people I've seen on Twitch and other platforms streaming the game from non-English speaking countries. I've seen some very early data on the game about, where our strong and weak kind of regions for people playing the game are. And yeah, it's fairly typical in terms of you've got a lot of people from like America and places like that. But I am fairly impressed by how broad of a reach you can get when your game doesn't have a lot of language as well. Just speaking on the terms of literature and how that transcends video games and things. And this is interesting to me. And this is the first time I've worked on a game or around a game where the barriers to playing it are kind of very small in all regards. You don't even have to read. You just kind of have to understand the universal physical act that is portrayed in the game.
I guess the other thing with Unpacking in particular is that it is a universal experience. Like, I would imagine that a lot of people who are making games, not just visual novels, but games in general, are kind of making works that speak to their culture or a product of their culture, but they don't necessarily translate into, for example, the experiences of a person in the Middle East or in Brazil or Eastern Europe or whatever. But everybody moves. That's just one of those human experiences that is universal. So I would imagine that Unpacking would have that kind of universal resonance.
Yeah. And even though our character is definitely not from a standard background and arc in their life that they go through, I would say there's not going to be a lot of parallels to people in the Middle East necessarily. But I think the universal act of the unpacking of the objects, the importance of the things you take with you, that translates pretty much through every culture.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it hasn't been all positive. I mean, it has been all positive in terms of how people respond to the game, really, but there has obviously been conversations that have erupted as a result of your game. And I think you know where I'm going with this, but certainly Unpacking reignited the discussion about how long a game needs to be in order to be worthwhile or worth spending money on or whatever. And I know that this is a conversation that I find to be nuts, but were you kind of expecting that this was going to occur when you made a game? Well, not you, but the team made a game that was 6 hours long or so?
Well, I think I expected it to some degree just based on like how much experience I have talking with people about business deals and value and pricing and different things. I've probably got more experience than the other people on the team when it comes to this stuff. It's typically been an area of the company and our teams that I've handled. And so I'm acutely aware of how how much the decision to be $10, $15, and $20 seems like a huge deal to a lot of people. And when you break that down with unpacking, we talked really early on actually about the price. And then we had debates and discussions and talks with Humble, who are publishing the game, and back and forward on what made sense and what we saw as the value of the game. And ultimately we came to the conclusion that we wanted to price the game what we felt it was worth, and also what made sense for us to continue on making games. We were like, it has to be both. It has to be, this is what we think it's worth, this is what we need to continue making games, and this is what we think people will pay for it. And yeah, there's been a lot of people who've said, there's no way this game is worth $20. This game is worth $5. This game is worth $10. This game is worth $7. They're always in the fairly low range. But ultimately, there's been a lot more people who've been willing to pay $20 for this experience, because it's not wide, but it is deep, is how I describe it. It doesn't go on and on and on and on forever, but what's there is so polished and personal and deep and interesting and engaging that it really compels people.
Yeah, I guess it's one of those things that as a media person, or in the media, we tend to only see the complaints coming in. So I'm sure there were plenty of people that were more than happy with the purchase. But yeah, those ones that were complaining about it. Yeah, sure. I was just going to say that. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, so it's basically just talking about sales and things. It was in the top 4 global top sellers on Steam for a little while, which is just absurd to us. So it really is, to me, coming back around to the fact that the people who think that it's a cheap game and will insist that games have to be cheap, they're not even people that I necessarily think of as the audience for the game anymore.
Sure.
Maybe they are, maybe they'll buy in when there's a sale, and that'll be great. I'm happy to let them wait for it to be 50% off, which is what they think that it's worth. But there's a disconnect there, and it comes back to a lot of the marketing stuff I talked about before, where people look at the outer shell and they think it's a meme game, and that's quite often where you'll see people with the ridiculous price things where they go, this is worth $5, because they think it's a meme. They think that that you take items out of a box and place it around and just scatter things, and that's it, and there's nothing more to it. They don't understand that it is this intricate story that's being told through thousands of items, and it's kind of just incredibly I guess very, very in depth is how I would describe the actual story that's being told in Unpacking.
Do you think for developers like yourselves and perhaps other independents out there, do you think there is that pressure, however creative or however solid the idea is at 6 hours, that they feel they need to expand it out? Because I guess where I'm coming from here is the last thing I'd want to see as a critic and somebody who enjoys playing games, obviously, is for more games to become bloated and kind of lose their worth as an experience, because there is that tension to just fill them with content. Do you think that there is that tension there for developers working on games like this? I mean, yours is successful, but a lot of others wouldn't be. And I have to wonder if part of the reason that they aren't is because of their length.
I mean, there's definitely a pressure there to have longer, more engaging games. There's a pressure to have replayable games. That's why I think you see such a dominant performance out of roguelikes and simulation games and games where you can take the entire game and toggle a number somewhere, and all of a sudden the entire game feels like a different experience, which is not how authored kind of games feel. Games like this, games like our previous game, Assault and Enter a Cactus, which is barely 2.5 hours long in a playthrough, which for a shoot 'em up, in my opinion, is twice as long as most of the greatest shoot 'em ups ever made. But when you're competing against roguelikes that are intended to be replayed 10,000 times before you get to the end, because you're meant to die and power up ever so slowly, it's very difficult to convince people that these authored experiences that are have a beginning, a middle, and an end are worth it, even if they are heavily replayable. So there's definitely a pressure there, but it's less of a pressure to like pad your game if you're making this kind of short experience, and it's more of a pressure just don't make these kinds of games, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I can imagine that the I guess the business side of things in terms of convincing people to take on a game like this is more difficult when it kind of cuts against the grain of, I guess, best practice. I'm sure you would have heard that word a bit.
Yeah, for sure. The business case it's so tricky. Once again, because people don't understand the audience at the start. Even now, when it's a huge success, I think a lot of people don't understand the audience. And when they don't understand it, even if it's big, they don't know what to do with it, what value to get out of it, right? If you're talking to potential partners and things. Then there's the whole thing about risk, right? And like, this is why we funded the game ourselves, because one, I believed in it, and so did Tim, and so did Jeff, and we took all of the money that we made from Cactus and we reinvested it into this project to make sure that, like, you know, Ren could work on it full time, and then we would all benefit at the end when it comes out, because we thought this is something that should exist, that's going to be really successful, and we'll all benefit. But I don't know how we would have gone at the time getting funding externally. I somehow doubt, based on how things went, that we would have got enough funding, knowing now how much the game actually costs to make. The amount of funding that you can get for these things just seems very small, and often in some cases very predatory. When people will give it to you as well, they'll ask for enormous amounts when the game comes out, like amounts that don't make any sense for how much they're willing to invest, because they see the project as so risky that they're only willing to give you terms that basically ensure their own success.
Sure. You've been in the industry, in the indie space for quite a while now. Would you say it's getting easier with the movements that are happening in the industry? Is it easier to come up with a game like Unpacking, get it out there and make it commercially successful than it might have been a decade ago?
It's certainly tools-wise easier. Everybody's trying to move their tools in a direction that makes them more accessible, which is kind of good. The tools are better for bringing it to different platforms. Like Unity is now a very useful multi-platform engine, where it was barely useful outside of PC when I first started tinkering with it in the early 2010 kind of time frame, when I was still at Sega. And that's kind of good. But in terms of actually bringing a game to market and being commercially successful, I'd argue that it's harder than ever now, because there's competition is so strong for like attention, and the ability to stand out is so incredibly difficult. If you're established and successful, it's really easy. And I feel like we're slowly getting to that point at Witchbeam. I've had so many people contact me after Unpacking came out who want to, like, help us or do deals or do something else or talk to us about the future. And that's really, really good. But that certainly hasn't been the experience over the 8 or so years we've been doing this.
I would have to assume that at least some of those conversations have been about an Unpacking too. It's like once it's successful, all of a sudden everybody wants sequels, right?
Surprisingly, aside from players who keep asking us for more stories, nobody else has come up to us and said, "Hey, let's you want to make a sequel here? What are you doing here?" And that's been interesting. We actually haven't had the discussion internally either, other than to say that this is the complete arc of this story. This game is, to us, we view the game as being wholly complete and not in need of expansion or extension. And I think it would be a very long time before we would even have an internal discussion about, like, let's get started on a sequel before creatively we talk about a bunch of other things.
Sure. And as you've said on this podcast a couple of times, you weren't the creative force behind Unpacking. And I guess the question I have for you is, do you have another game, in mind? Is there anything you personally are looking at doing next?
Yeah, so I am working on another game that is in parallel, primarily being developed by myself, Jeff Van Dyke, who is one of the other co-founders of Witchbeam and does all of our audio, including the 14,000 sounds in Unpacking. I don't know if you've read one of the bajillion articles about that, but people find it oh so exciting.
It's always the big numbers, isn't it? It's always
It
the
is.
big numbers.
These things, they went viral. I tweeted 2 things about game cubes and sounds, and people wouldn't stop talking about it. My favorite one is when I got credited as Twitter user Sanatan Mishra, who tweeted about this. And then it's like, oh yeah, I founded the company that made the game, but whatever. Anyway, I am working on another game. So is Jeff, and so is some new partners we're working with. A fellow named Seiji Tanaka, who was an animator on Journey at that game company way back when, and then left the games industry for a while and is now coming back. And we're partnering with some other great folks here in Queensland who are working part-time to help us with the art, Disparity Games, and Chris Webb who does work at Five Lives, I believe, has helped us with a little bit of tech stuff.
Sounds like you're
that
busy.
Game, it is. We are busy, and that game. I'm sorry. I just wanted to credit everybody else because
Yeah,
I feel like it's important to try and make sure that people know who actually make these games. When it is a small team and everybody's actually hands-on, and it's not 1,000 people who touched a chair or whatever. It's important to me to make sure people know who makes this stuff. And that game is called Tempopo, and we're not really ready to showcase it yet. I did show it at a local event here in Queensland a couple of weeks back. And there will be more information about it soon. It has no platform, it has no release date. It is also a puzzle game, but this one is a lot more of a traditional puzzler. I'd say it's kind of like somewhere between like Lemmings and Captain Toad meeting each other, with a bit of Choo Choo Rocket thrown in there. If I'm just like throwing out popular games that I'm probably never going to make a game as good as.
I was just about to say you just listed a whole lot of games that got my attention there.
They're fantastic games, right? And immediately by listing them, you think my game is going to be fantastic. That's the benefit of when you do these X meet Y comparisons. It's easy for me to list great games.
Only if you can live up to them. I mean, I'm occasionally I give PR advice to various indies, and one thing I'll always say is don't compare yourself to Call of Duties or other big games, because you're just asking for the comparison there. But I'm sure your games.
That's right.
I'm sure your games will be more than deserving of that comparison. I'm really looking forward to hearing more about that one.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason I use these games as comparison points for now is because I can't show the game. And if I could show the game and feel confident in showing the game publicly, or the trailer or something else, you'd be like, well, this is what it is. And you can compare it to whatever you want. But thematic, like stylish wise, I think that's kind of the space that it exists in. And it's a puzzle game about composing foolproof plans and guiding these magical sprites to rescue musical flowers, essentially, on a little like gardens that are floating in the sky. So it's a bit different from what I've done before with a twin stick shoot 'em up, and then doing the business side on a game about unpacking someone's life. And it's a much smaller scale game than what we've done before, but hopefully I can show it to you soon.
I look forward to that, and best of luck with it. And of course, best of luck with the ongoing success of Unpacking. I don't think it's going away anytime soon.
Well,
once it gets to that kind of level on the charts, it's going to keep plugging away in people's minds for quite some time. So
yeah, we'll have to see if people keep thinking it's worth the money, hey, or if they all get really angry at us and insist that it's only worth $5.
Yes, indeed. Well, anyway, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate your time. And yes, I'm sure we'll be talking again quite soon.
Cheers.